Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, we discuss stressed crops, dry weather, and market volatility. Find out why you don't want to mow your field ditches. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss future episodes.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have Ben and Turk. And Ben, lots of stuff going on in the field. This drought, we're getting spotty rains. What do you got for us today?
This week we had our sales managers, a bunch of sales managers in for a sales meeting, and they gave me a nice little update about how everything's looking. As we know, the northern portion of the state of Iowa has been hot and dry, and that's kind of, there's a whole bunch of the Corn Belt, the western Corn Belt, that's fallen in that same situation. They said, some of the southern guys, as they were traveling up, Bowling Green, Missouri was kind of the line where things look a lot better south of Bowling Green and southern Illinois, southern Missouri, where they've been catching timely rains and they weren't too wet to get started off in the beginning in April. So weather is seeming to be the most important thing that we're looking at right now. Before we were starting to air, we kind of talked about, we just got our test plot planted this week, or I guess it would have been end of last week. And
for the second time,
we planted in that middle of May time frame, and we had lack of oxygen on clay pan style soils, and so we got our test plot in for the second time, and we have corn emerged, and we kind of were talking about how many stages behind we were going to be and what the difference is. Well, we had that calculator posted 2 or 3 weeks ago about that, what that looks like, and how many leaf stages a corn plant will actually drop in order to try to hit maturity at the right time. So
what you're saying, Ben, is that when you plant later, the corn plant tries to catch up and it actually drops leaves. In other words, it doesn't develop as many leaves on the lower leaves?
Correct.
So
it's growing faster. It's stretching length in between nodes, and it doesn't take as many leaves to hit maturity on that. So 111-day product like our 9734 would originally be 2,750 growing degree units to hit black layer. So I plug into the calculator that product, and it goes from 2750 down to 2532. Now if you do the math backwards, it takes about 70 growing degree units per leaf, and you're looking at 200, so you're looking at about 3 leaf stages is what a corn plant would drop from a June 1st, 2nd, 3rd time frame compared to a May time frame at that. So.
And when we talk about soybeans, we got kind of a similar thing going on. We won't be long here. We'll be at the longest day of the year, and at that point, depending upon maturity, that sends a signal. The length of night sends a signal to soybeans to start flowering. So, what's the rule of thumb on soybeans, Turk?
As far as
delayed planting. In other words, I'm planting 4 weeks later. How many days is that going to delay the maturity? 4 weeks.
Depends on the maturity you're going to plant, but if you plant the same variety, it's only about 4 days. So so that's when we're looking at those delayed plantings, and we're really looking at the frost date, and because beans mature by the length of the night, and the nights will start getting shorter first part of next week. So that's when the plants are starting to realize that we've got to do something that triggers the flowering stage, and we go from growth to reproduction very quickly, and so but that delay in planting does not hurt us as much as it does in corn. And so as we get later and later into June, which we're getting close to July here now, with the longest day of the year coming up here, we want to be sure that we're moving our maturities fuller season, not earlier, if we're still trying to plant beans or even thinking about replant. But population narrowing rows is the key for doing
your plants are going to be short, so
Yep.
Increase the population and narrow those rows down to utilize the sunlight, because you have less nodes. Shorter plant, less nodes, less pods.
The difference is those 4 days. The later you plant, the bean plant does a little bit like the corn plant does. It'll push a little bit harder, and that's the reason that it isn't as much as you think it is.
Yeah, and nature wants to produce a seed because that's the next generation of crop. So it's going to do a lot of things to try to speed up to make sure it produces a viable seed that will it's for survival of the species.
If you look at this Iowa State report that came out on Tuesday of this week about where things are progressing, some of the northern guys that were a little bit drier, that got their stuff planted in the first half of April, like really early, ultra early planted stuff, and some of the stuff like Ealer Brothers, the experiment that they do on a couple acres, they're already seeing their first rounds of R1. So this is the whole point of why they try to push the bubble and try to get their planting done on the first half of April or April 15th, wherever that is because you now gain an extra week and a half of flowering starting to happen, and that's going to add more bushels, hopefully more opportunity to put pods and flowers pods on for the end of the year.
Just like I said, that for every week later that you plant from normal, if you plant weeks earlier than normal, it moves that time ahead a little bit as well. So a bean plant or a same maturity bean planted 2 to 3 weeks earlier is going to mature 2 to 3 days earlier than that one planted in a normal season. So therefore also we're getting earlier flowering from those beans as well.
Yep.
But I also say, Turk, the two most important times in a soybean's life is emergence, getting a stand, and then rain during pod fill. So if you still miss rain during pod fill, it don't matter how tall or how many pods you got,
how early, how late,
doesn't make any difference. So in 83 and 88, we had dry years, but then we got rain latter part of August, and sometimes the later planted beans are better just because they caught the rain. So the critical part on soybeans is not here yet. It's going to be August rains.
In those drought years that we actually had soybeans out yielding corn.
Correct.
In those years because we got those late August rains.
And soybeans at some point, if it does get too dry, they just stop. They stop growing.
They just basically go into dormancy, I would call it. And then when that rain comes, then away they go.
So soybeans, we got a little more time before it gets situations critical. But corn, how many weeks away?
For the southern guys that were up here, they were talking about corn that was shoulder high, so they're probably looking at a week and a half, 2 weeks before you see your first tassels. For the guys that planted the last week of April, you're talking probably a week after July 4th. Middle of July, you're probably going to see a lot of fields start tasseling. Probably a couple weeks after that's when you're going to start seeing some of this early June planted corn.
So pollination is when the corn plant needs the most water. Is that right?
Correct. Yep. And we have like these pictures here that Alex can overlay. We have corn that's curling right now. Curled corn isn't the worst thing in the world when it's at V7, V8.
Right.
It's just stretching right now. It's going under some heat stress. It's stretching roots and putting roots down as far as possible. Now, do we want curling this early in the season? Probably not. But is it super detrimental to yield? I'd rather have a little bit of stress now than that stress of what we're talking about during pollination.
That curling is how that corn plant protects itself.
Correct.
Now, Ben, is it true that the hybrids that actually curl first are the ones that can actually take more stress, and the ones that don't curl are the ones that could be really more prone to stress? In other words, it's a self-protection mechanism, correct?
Yep.
And the ones that recognize drought earlier will curl first, and the ones that don't recognize drought curl later. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. So basically what it's doing is it's closing the stomates, it's curling the leaves to try to lower the humidity so that you don't have not quite as much evaporation going off of that plant. No, it's actually raising the humidity so you don't have as much inside that whorl, so you don't have as much moisture leaving the plant.
So the plant actually, as it's closing, it's actually shrinking the surface, which causes the curl.
Yep.
Well, and soybeans, they droop, right? The leaves droop when it gets really hot, and again, are they just trying to deflect the direct sunlight?
And changing the direction of the leaf so that it's not getting direct sunlight.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the plants, they know what to do, but they can only do it so long.
And that brings us, it transitions into the next topic of weather. What do you think we're going to see in the next 7 to 10 days?
Well, right now, the Board of Trade is looking at the curled up plants and thinking that that there's a lot of things going on. We're seeing huge volatility this week, but the forecast is what's affecting the markets this week. Thursday this week we've seen $1.30 trading range in the nearby contracts on soybeans, and huge fall off. A lot of it is to do with people wanting to try and get evened up because the forecast turned cooler for next week, and looks up like there's a few bigger chances of rain come Monday morning or Sunday night. If that forecast doesn't materialize and we don't get those rains and that coolness doesn't get here, we're going to be right back up going the other way just as fast. And again, we're getting to that critical time of year for corn that people are going to be, we're in that time frame where they're going to look at that 2-week out forecast to try and figure out what's going to be happening at pollination on corn. We still got time on soybeans.
You know, there's an old wise tale that says you never have a good wheat crop and a good corn crop. And right now, you know, we're getting some early indications of Mershman wheat yielding pretty incredibly well, right, Ben?
Yeah, so I know for a fact some of our seed production is coming off, and they were saying it was ranging anywhere from 60 to 135 bushel out in the field. So in one instance, and we also heard reports back from non-seed production stuff that is doing absolutely phenomenal. Sounds like there's a lot of 75, 80, 85 bushel wheat out in the southern Illinois, southern Missouri, Arkansas.
And heavy test weight.
So the old saying, you know, if it's got wheat likes dry weather and performs best in drier weather, and corn likes moist weather and, you know, not super hot, but so there's may be true this year that, you know, if we got a good wheat crop, we may not have a great corn crop. So time will tell. But soybeans, even in 1988, I remember that was the first time I think in my life I was ever scared that we wouldn't have any seed to sell. I mean, it was that dry. But then we got those late rains, and we had seed. We didn't have tremendous yields, but we had seed. And that was the year of the spider mites. And you might talk a little bit about spider mites.
If there was a year to not mow ditches, I probably wouldn't be mowing a lot of ditches right now. If we miss this rain forecast that's supposed to be coming across.
Okay, why would you not want to mow your ditch?
When you mow your ditch, you severely limit the amount of vegetation, especially broadleaves. It seems like once you mow your ditches, the spider mites will move out of the ditches into the soybean fields for feeding and shade purposes.
And any other critter that lives out there.
Yep. So a lot of the times we will see spider mites and insect damage happen on the fields that are mowed, and you can go to the neighbor's field right across that hasn't mowed his road ditches, and there's almost no damage, and if it is, it's on the outside row or two.
So they're in the ditches right now, and if you take away that lush green growth, they're going somewhere where they can find lush green growth.
That's correct.
So, and the other thing, spider mites, my experience with that, and Turk and Ben, you can add in, I mean, they are a nasty, nasty insect. Even though they're, you know, a piece of paper, shake the leaves, and you see the little dots on that piece of paper move around, that means you got spider mites. And they can destroy a crop very quickly. I mean, you cannot be too aggressive in spraying for spider mites, in my opinion. Any comments from you?
Well, again, like Ben said, they're probably out there right now in those waterways and fence rows and road ditches, and so you keep an eye on those areas. And when you mow them, you're
driving them out.
Be looking, you're driving them out. So if you were gonna pick an area to spray first, I'd dang sure hit those borders everywhere first to be
as a deterrent, as a block.
At preemptive, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But they also can blow into a field too on windy, hot, dry days.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So they move pretty rapidly.
And be careful about what insecticides that you're choosing to use.
Yep.
I think if I remember correctly, so I could be wrong, so don't quote it, but I think it's pyrethroids that spider mites are highly resistant to, so you have to switch to organophosphates, and there's another class that's even more effective beyond the organophosphates. But it's just, there's two different classes of chemistry. You have to really pay attention to which ones work on spider mites.
Yeah, you want longevity. You don't want something that's quick and easy. You want something that's long, and they usually cost more, unfortunately.
Talk to your chemical supplier. He'll have the answers for you.
Yep, and then you know what happens when we have widespread drought, then it becomes hard to get those herbicides.
It's been hard to get them all year long,
Yep.
and it'll be harder yet here very shortly.
You know, challenges for farmers never end. I mean, we go to the grocery store, we see everything full we always wonder, we don't really worry about what it takes to produce a crop. And I think the only time we've ever had people panic a little bit is during the pandemic and COVID thing, when they went in to get their meat and their meat wasn't there. So
Or their toilet paper.
Anything else?
It's been a busy week, and we'll have more agronomic stuff to check up on next week. See if we get a rain.
Very good, Ben. Ben, this corny joke that I'm going to tell was written for you. I mean, it's just awesome. This was, I have some ghostwriters out there, I must admit, to help me out with corny jokes. So I always blame them if I got a bad one, if they got a good one. And this one here came from Dave O'Hara, who is actually a sportscaster and has the Dave O'Hara show on the Cedar Rapids station. And anyhow, he said, Joe, this one's for you. And I said, okay, let me hear it. So, where does a corn plant keep its money? Where does a corn plant keep its money? The stock market.
Of course.
Of course.
Well, nobody's laughing again, except me, but that's the way it goes. Well, thank you for your business this past year. It's been a real pleasure serving you, and we hope that your crop gets adequate rain and your family is healthy. We sincerely appreciate your business, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe.